Sunshine in my pocket, got that good soul in my feet. I feel that hot blood in my body when it drops. Ooh, I can't take my eyes off it. Moving so phenomenally.
Hello, everybody. All right, so if you're standing up, I'm going to ask you a question. So I want to talk about something called the rise of alternative data, which is a pretty cool concept. I'm a recovering consultant, so I've been in the second year, so it'll take a bit of time. But in the meantime, I want to talk about this entire thing on design and experience. So we've been talking about how we reimagine experiences today, how we bring mobile into it, how we think about marketing in a whole new way. But in this age of data and worrying about papier and worrying about content, how do we start to think about our relevance as organizations in a world where people are changing their habits on a variable manner? It's changing every day. What we assume today completely changes tomorrow. So what do we do about that? So I want to introduce you to my friend Tom. So Tom is a middle-aged white male, lives out in Bryanston, has a beautiful wife. She's actually a creative designer, and he has a 14-year-old daughter named Jane. And Tom is a typical guy that lives in Bryanston, in the northern parts of Johannesburg, and he's done quite well for himself. In fact, he's actually today sitting at some park with a picket fence around him, which is probably the quintessential dream. If you're a youngster wanting to have a wonderful day out with your family and wanting to do good. But that's not the reality. Tom has started to become an anomaly. This aspirational dream to find a Tom or become a Tom isn't there anymore. Something's changing. So given that I run a large big data firm, it's probably important to give you some stats. 28 is the peak of the unemployment rate in the country last year. Right? It dropped this year from 27.7 to 26.6. Stat number one. Stat number two, 0.8, the GDP growth in our country last year. This is when Africa's growing at 4 to 6%. We grew at 0.8%. What else? 73, the percent of your disposable income that services bank debt every year. 73% of disposable income services bank debt. Let's just take this in. We're marketing, we're digital. We're looking to find those consumers. Those consumers are highly indebted, right? There are 55 million people in the country. 24 million have active credit. They have an account with the bank, they have a personal loan, they've got a mortgage, they've got some kind of facility going on. Of that 24 million, 11 million are credit impaired. They're defaulting and they're on their way to bad debt. You guys getting it? Now in the profession we're in today, we're looking to find the customer. We're looking to have the best campaign ever. You need to juxtapose that today with what I'm saying. It's becoming harder to measure our success in digital and marketing. These are the odds we're playing with. Think about the rate of our income growth. So inflation's around 6%, and the average income increase is around 1%. So the cost of living, inflation, is around 6%, and the rate at which our salaries are increasing is around 7%. What that means is that we have 1% on an average household to do more. What do you do more with 1%? Think about it. This is why it's getting worse. So we have a tough context to think about. And in that, against the backdrop of a tough context, and this is data-driven, these are actual stats of what's happening around us. Tom has become an anomaly. Somebody's found Tom, and they're looking after him, and he has a loyalty program, and Tom's not going to move. And when Tom doesn't move, what do you start to do? So I want to give you a perspective of a concept that's going to help us in digital think differently. This is our flag, and that's a picture of Nelson Mandela in the silhouette. And I guess the question is, how do you create a better life for all when you have the odds stacked against us? We can sit and reimagine things, but could we reimagine in a better way? Could we do it faster? And could data help us make that possible? We all talk about IoT, the number of mobile devices. In fact, each one of you has more data than you know what to do with. But what are you doing with it, and how do you think differently about it? So in the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you a few ideas of some key concepts that are happening in the world right now, and not just in the world, in South Africa right now. And you need to ask yourself, why aren't you considering this? Why aren't you doing it? And then I'll end by giving you a few real examples of your competitors in South Africa and what they're doing to find those consumers. So there's a concept called alternative data, not alternative facts. Let's be clear, don't tweet that. You want to tweet alternative data. Alternative data is non-traditional data to answer a specific question. So if a question was, should I give you a credit facility based on what you currently earn? That's a traditional way. If you're a millennial just entering the job market and you've never had access to credit before, you're an unknown anomaly to the bank, chances of you getting access to credit are actually quite hard. In the same way, if you're applying for a job and you didn't have the resume that aligned to the job spec, the chance of you being considered highly actually quite difficult. So part of the hypothesis of how we think differently about data is, could we create inferences about a primary subject by looking somewhere else? Could I look somewhere else and figure out the propensity to do something in a field that doesn't even relate to that data? So for example, could where I live affect whether I got credit? Could the fact that I studied science at university tell you that I'd be great at digital? The fact that I dress a certain way, could it help you decide whether I was the best candidate in the room? This concept is called alternative data. It's a way of looking at things in a non-traditional way. And when you see it, you shouldn't be shocked. When you see that, you need to embrace what it tells you and figure out whether that flower could be considered in the exact same context as those 3 cacti. So there's a whole bunch of ways to know me better. I'm going to tell you what 6 concepts that I think are relevant for us when we think about digital and think about finding that consumer in their point of need. The very first one is houses, right? Now, it sounds crazy, right? But here's a fact. Where you live tells me more about you. In fact, in my business, knowing what suburb code you live in allows me to figure out how you could behave. Because I know everybody else that lives in a suburb. Are all those guys good? Are they bad and are they ugly? What do we know about them and what could we infer about them? What's the average type of person living in a certain area? Is he a doctor? Is he a scientist? What kind of LSM is he? And how could we infer things about that? What else? Qualifications. So I may be on a track to study something at university. I may be at Vega Design School doing something. If I knew now what you're studying, could I infer something 3 years from now? Not today, because today I don't have my qualification yet. I haven't even written my first exam. But if I could figure out that the school I went to had a certain pass rate and a certain caliber of person came out of that school, what would it do in terms of how I look to hyper-personalize a campaign? How could I find that person in their point of need? How could I take that data, overlay that on the property data I have, and find something new? Mobile data. Now, we all heard about the number of mobile devices in the country. One of the things about devices is that people swap SIM cards a lot. There's something we call SIM frequency swapping. And what that means is that on a typical day, an average person tends to swap SIM cards because Telco 1 gives you a really good deal, but from only 8 to 12 p.m., and then a really good deal from 12 to 12, and then you get Night Surfer coming in. What if you could figure out that Naik swapped his SIM card from Telco 1 to Telco 2 every day? I had no loyalty to your telco. Would you use that to target me? Am I loyal to you? Am I using you just for a sticky deal? And if somebody offered me a free ice cream, I'd probably leave you as well. Could I figure that out? So that's mobile data. What about movement? The fact that Lee moves around the stage a lot when he talks. Does he have a problem? Should he speak to somebody? Does the fact that Lee walks up and down on the stage, does it infer something about Lee? If you're looking to target Lee to join your bank, and I don't have your banking app, the chances of me being impressed by your banking app are 0. How do you get me to use your app? Is there a way to take the mobile data you have, link it to the movement data, and figure out that Lee Naik, he works at a certain employer. it requires him to travel past a certain point 5 times a week. If Lee does travel past us 5 times a week and is of a certain persona in a certain segment, should I then target Lee to get to the app? But I don't need an app to get to Lee. There are over 6 million apps in the Apple App Store. If I had to erase your phone right now, which ones would you reinstall? You wouldn't choose all 103. You'd probably just choose 2 or 3 of them. So how do I stay sticky with you when I never liked you to start with? So this is a key point. As we look at the movement of people, how do you overlay that with other sources of data? I'll give you a good example. A big thing right now is fiber to the home. So if you know one of the big players, the trick is, can I win your estate over? What if we could tell you that I could find an estate where I needed 100 people to sign up to a certain product, and I could tell you which person to start with, which house to skip, whether the person was the owner, whether he was the tenant, and whether he liked going to the beach. What if you could converge that? The car. So we have the privilege of actually holding the book that when you go into a dealership and the guy has that book tight to his chest and says, I can't show you. You know that guy? He says, no, I can't show you the book, but your car's only worth X and not Y. So we actually have the privilege of holding all the data for the whole country. So my team figures out how much your car will be worth next year. Think about all that data that's sitting in there, right? I've always owned an Audi. If you offered me a BMW, I may take the deal, but probably within X amount of months, I'll drop you the second Audi offers me a better deal, right? Could you figure out the propensity of my loyalty to a new brand based on my history of behavior? Could you figure out, for example, that Lee changes his car on the 20th month of a new car buying cycle? He gets a bit itchy. Could you figure that out, right? Why are you sending 1 million spam SMSs to people when you could find the 50,000 that fit the exact persona of the car? What if? What about commercials, right? So you may not have a history as a person. Our president announced about a week ago this concept called lifestyle audits. So you may look like a simple man from a simple area, but you've got 3 Lamborghinis and you have a plane parked somewhere else. In identifying this hyper-personalized person, could you figure out that you have commercial interests that infer certain things about you? So as a person, I may look really well, and I may look like I could afford something, but if you overlay that with other data, in this case, my commercial interest, what if my business is doing really, really badly? What does it infer about me? Now, these 6 examples are concepts of alternative data. This is data that's in the country already, and it's been used all over the world typically. But if you start to think about the person you're targeting, not just with the experience, but in that 0 moment of truth, if you're trying to find me, could you find me better if you knew where to look? When I was there, and when I wasn't there, my favorite peeve at the moment is that my son loves pizza. So I've got this pizza app, and I won't out the brand, but I get spammed quite a lot for a 2-for-1 special. Now, if that app and the app owner knew that my son was buying the app, wouldn't they target me with, I don't know, chocolate-covered pizza, as opposed to a pizza, maybe I'm gluten-free and I can't eat pizza. So now it annoys me versus entice me to buy your offer. So the question about alternative data, can you know more about a person in a different way? Then there's this thing about trended data, which is the next concept I'm going to talk about. So alternative data was the first concept. The second is trended data. The problem with society now is that we're quite judgmental. We hold the worst of my past against me as you make a decision about my future. Any chance I have of being a better person, I'm actually stuck because you use the rules you've always used against me forever. So trended data talks about how there's a pattern change, there's a behavior change in people. And when you start to figure out, can I call the trend? What if I was really bad and I was improving? And I would improve to the point that it would be acceptable to you within 2 months. What would you do? So trended data talks about how we can start to rehabilitate people, how we can drive financial inclusion. If you've always been bad, could you be better? And does the current system that we employ in digital and marketing allow us to do that? The answer is not really. So I'll give you a real example. What if I was a better person, and like the gentleman, the wife on the screen right now, I was actually able to be a better person. I looked the part, I looked sincere, I had this honesty in my eyes. But when you looked at the data, you saw something that said, Lee, you were really bad in 1983. It's 2018, people. What's changed? So when I spoke earlier about the credit market, if you don't know about the credit market, we have a consumer-driven economy. So even though we had a really tough couple of years, the fact that we have a strong retail market, a strong vehicle market, a strong home loan market for that matter, actually props up our entire industry and our entire economy. And that's pretty good. But here's a guy, let's call him Tom for a second, another version of Tom. And Tom is looking to get a home loan, right? Tom had some challenges previously. He had some bit of a rough time. He made some bad calls in his life. And Tom is going to apply for a home loan. It's their first house, right? He's missed a payment once or twice. And he's hung out with some bad guys. And the instant response is, you sound like a bad risk person. Now, let's talk about banking for a second, because it's a really good example. There are 5 banks that are top. If you asked me a year ago, 2 years ago, how many top banks, we'd all say 4. And now the 4th bank's the 5th bank, and the 5th bank's the 4th bank. Does the 4th bank become the 3rd bank, and the 3rd bank become the 4th bank? Who knows? But here's the interesting point. The game right now is trying to find these new customers, and even worse than finding them is getting them to stay. And they're not staying. What do you do about that? Everyone's fishing the exact same pond with the same ATL and the same campaign, and no one's actually winning, to be honest. There's only one person winning, and they're winning at about 250,000 new accounts per month. This is public data, right? The other ones are losing in effect. How do you find new customers? Could you define a new pond? So we apply this concept of alternative data and trended data across the entire population. A population of 55 million people, where there are 24 million credit active, but 32 million economically active. These are the guys that go to the mashonisas, the loan sharks. They have a very small profile, which excludes them from the formal economy of loyalty and a whole bunch of other stuff that you offer. We ran a concept through them. We found 3 million new good consumers. And I stand here today saying that no bank, no telco, and no insurer can see these customers. So that's a challenge for you. That's interesting. How did you find them? What did you find about them? The point about financial and social inclusion in the context of Africa and the context of what we're talking about today says, what do you do differently? We found 3 million people that have shown a propensity to be a better person. Now, if I told you I had 3 million people, would you be open to changing how you think about those people? Because if you don't change how we think, you're doomed to fail. It's going to happen. Can I be a good customer? Here's an example of life insurance. The biggest problem in life is something called straight-through processing. Whenever I get a quotation for my insurance, I need to get something called wet underwriting done, i.e. send a nurse to your house, take your blood, urine, poke you with a needle, and you may be worried about diseases you have or don't have. And that affects something we call NTU, not taken up, right? It costs a lot more, so your average handling time is higher, and your cost to acquire new business is quite tough. We built a model last year, or a couple of years ago now, that's able to identify in a sample of people that could skip wet underwriting by inferring things about their relative mortality. It sounds a bit hectic, right? Without looking at their blood and their urine and other health features, could you infer relative mortality to improve straight-through processing? Now, every second you spend off the page where you want to actually get them to sign up, actually increases your not taken up rate propensity. That's the reality. So what do? So we built a model that's able to find those customers that has a high likelihood of not dying. A good insurance customer sticks on your books for at least 3 years until it becomes worthwhile. Could you find those customers? That's an example. Here's a good point. Do you know that my digital aspirations are not my reality? The fact that I spend my days searching for Lamborghini Gallardo on Google and you pitch me a Gallardo on Facebook doesn't mean I can afford a Gallardo, right? This is a really important point I want you guys to take away as I wrap up, is that my aspirations need to converge. When you think about custom audiences and you follow my breadcrumb to figure that I'm a great candidate for a Gallardo, actually I'm not. What else could you do to figure out that my aspiration sitting at the top of this roof is not my reality? Nirvana for us in digital is converging my digital aspiration with my offline reality. I want to give you one last thought as a wrap up. If content is king, then context is God. If context is God, then data is its religion. Thank you, everybody.